Welcome back, everyone. We're going to start our deep dive sessions now, and you are all in deep dive session A currently, which is focused on pediatrics. The title of this session is More Than Just Games, Use of Virtual Reality in Pediatric Populations. And so when we put together these deep dive sessions, we really realized that we need an opportunity for a long form session where we can get top experts to just sit and talk, not just for 20 minutes, but for 2 hours. Because every year that we do this, we find that there's never enough time. Even if we do an hour, even if we do 2 hours, it's not enough time. So we've got some unbelievable experts with us today for this deep dive session on pediatrics. Be sure to stay active in the live chat so that we can communicate about these ideas. And we'll be moderating that chat as well over the course of this session. This session is going to be led by Kate Donovan. Dr. Donovan is the clinical director of immersive technologies for the Innovation Digital Health Accelerator at Boston Children's Hospital, and a real innovator in using virtual reality for children. Of course, there's special considerations whenever we're working with kids, and Kate is a real expert there. That's what she does for a living, is thinking about all the different ways that we can use technology and XR in particular with kids. And she will be moderating this panel discussion along with Omkar Kulkarni, Jeffrey Gold, and Aaron Bogdansky. And I will let Kate introduce the panelists. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the four of them who are going to take over and explore the world of pediatric MXR. Thanks, Kate. Take it away.
All right. So I was thinking we could kind of run this like a podcast where we can just have conversation. I sent an email earlier in regards to that. I have a few topics that I wrote on a Google sheet, and I got a couple of more questions from a Slack channel that I'm on with some what do you call them? Child life specialists. So I figured I'd throw some of those questions in as well. But if we want to go around and just do a quick intro of some of the work that you're doing, I think that would be a great way to start. Do you want to start, Erin?
Sure. And before we start, I do know that this is a panel focused on pediatrics, but I want to honor my friends, Raphael and Sarah Hill and Jeff Tarrant, like everybody that has been in this space with mental health, to honor them, because it's such an exciting time to actually get medical extended reality to be recognized as telepsych. And I just want to say hello to my friends who are part of this conference and just honor them as well. But I wanted to share with you at the beginning of this, Brennan and I were talking about the fact that Congress has just passed the Child Mental Health Care Act in bipartisan support with Connecticut. And it's really exciting that this panel is focused on pediatrics, because this is going to change everything. So just a quick background about me. I'm just a psychotherapist. I'm based in Oakland, California, and I launched TheraVR as the first telepsych platform using virtual reality with biometrics. And so we're an early stage startup. We're going through we're IRB approved in clinical trials, and we're actually going through our FDA approvals for breakthrough medical device. And so I started Thera as a prototype 4 years ago, and that prototype has turned into now 7 different clinical scenes and an evidence-based treatment. And we're a small team, early stage startup, but our passion and our mission is to save children's lives.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Omkar, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hello. My name is Omkar Kulkarni. I am the Chief Innovation Digital Transformation Officer at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. So my role and focus is around, our core function is to improve pediatric care delivery. And one of the ways that we do that, one of the major ways we do that, is to bring promising technology, innovative cutting-edge technology to our patients, through our providers. We've got Dr. Gold, who you'll hear from in a second, was one of our leaders, and specifically in the mixed reality space. But it's largely about creating and producing evidence that can then justify the implementation of these technologies from studies to bedside and clinical practice, right? So how do we do all of that? Again, to solve the core pressing problems in pediatrics. That's what I get to do. It's a fun job and excited to be on the panel.
Brilliant. Thank you. Jeffrey.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on the panel. It's very exciting. VMed, we've been with them since the beginning, so it's kind of exciting to be in another year virtually. So my name is Jeffrey Gold. I'm a pediatric psychologist and a clinical researcher at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, and for 20 years now this month, and also at USC in departments of anesthesia, pediatrics, psychiatry, and behavioral sciences. And I've been working in the VR space since the early 2000s, specifically around managing pain and anxiety for routine medical procedures. And that mission has been growing at our hospital, and internationally it's been growing to be extended into other types of digital therapeutics. So it's great to be on this panel with everybody and to be able to talk about VR and mixed reality applications in this space for children and adolescents. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. So thanks for the introduction.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I'm Kate Donovan. I'm the Clinical Director of Innovation at Boston Children's Hospital. I work for the Department of Pediatrics, the Innovation Digital Health Accelerator, and our simulation program. Our XR program actually falls under the umbrella of simulation, and we have fingers on the education side for clinical education, as well as the patient side for many use cases. And I'm very excited to be on this panel as well, moderating this panel. So I wanted to start out, I have a few topics that we can start with. And I think the biggest one that people are talking about is that word, metaverse. What are your thoughts about metaverse, and where are we with that in healthcare?
Should I start?
Sure.
In terms of being an innovator of my software and the discussion around metaverse, I think in my experience right now is really focused on, the movement with Oculus. And Oculus, of course, is a Facebook product, and this was the switch, of commercializing VR. As a clinician, though, I think we need to be careful about, metaverse and privacy and compliance. And that was something that you and I were talking about early this week, is like, how do we protect our patient information, compliance, and safety, knowing that this metaverse is a lot, it's mostly coming from the social media side. That being said, I mean, there's all in terms of like head-mounted devices, there's other headsets other than Oculus, and they're not part of metaverse, right? So I think that people get confused that there is other VR technologies out there that don't use social media. And so that's kind of my take on metaverse, is like, it's exploded, it's changed the trajectory of like how people, like millions of people all over the world, look at VR. But in our hub in medical extended reality, I'm really focused on patient safety and compliance, and so I'm not really involved in that meta space per se, but I'd like to invite the thoughts from Jeffrey and Amkar on that.
Yeah, Jeffrey Amkar, any thoughts about metaverse? And I'll just say, from my standpoint, we're device agnostic, so we'll basically use anything that will work with a patient and family, but also looking at your concerns as well about privacy and whatnot. And I'm really interested in hearing what you guys think about that.
I want to point to Omkar first, because I think he sees a bigger picture of what's been happening. So
I don't know about that, but I'm happy to throw my thoughts in. So the way I see it is, if you think about metaverse, at least the way many people are thinking about it from the perspective of kind of the announcement from Meta, the company, and the idea of this, I see it as a future vision that, some technologists have around the future space, around how technology and people and their lives can kind of intersect. So if we were to use that definition, I think that's a better definition to start thinking about how healthcare can play into that space. And I think the people in this conference and the fact that there even is this conference reflects that there is a future where that could apply. How far away that future is, we can all debate, but it also depends exactly what we're envisioning that future to be. Meaning, is there a world in which the healthcare experience has an integrated approach to all these different virtual solutions, virtual reality, mixed reality solutions that we have? Right now, they're all point solutions, and they're deliberately so because that's what we can do. I think the idea of the big conversation around metaverse is, how do you take all these disparate kind of consumer-oriented mixed and virtual reality solutions and put them into a cohesive consumer experience, right? So if you apply that to healthcare, and you say, okay, we're using AR and VR and other types of mixed reality and other types of virtual, medicine generally, in different parts of how we deliver healthcare. How do you put it together so that perhaps there's a patient, or to your point, Kate, from what you do, a faculty member, physician, who can experience lots of these different things cohesively through one virtual experience? And again, that's probably a ways out. I think healthcare is always going to have some component to it that is going to be, that may not be purely virtual. But I think if you combine kind of the VR, AR, and the kind of telehealth, and even though that may not be necessarily in the mixed reality space, but if you put that all into this world of virtual medicine, it's fun to think about what that future looks like.
Thank you. Jeffrey, thoughts?
Yeah, I coming from a psychological background and recognizing the importance of interpersonal relationships and the kind of the human contact that comes in those relationships, I can see the meta universe being this parallel world where I think Omkar said it really nicely about point-to-point care. I really like that, and I think how this can be a partner or complement to that. I can't really imagine really living this second life sort of online completely. It doesn't really feel like it's plugged into that interpersonal human connection that we all seek and look for in life. But I think it has a place in medicine where instead of them being this disparate sort of points of care, I think threading the needle and making it a consistent point of care where it can be in mixed reality or digitally available on other types of applications and hardware we don't even know about yet. I think that might have a place on the shelf, and that could be very interesting for our patients that we work with, because I think a lot of the younger children and adolescents these days are much more social media driven. And so this is clearly their jam to be able to work in this medium, but I don't think it will ever be the player one mentality. I don't think it's going to be a full, complete life secondary to their primary life. So I like thinking about it as a partner and as a companion for us to deliver comprehensive care from all the points we always talk about. Simulation of things, which can be knowledge driven, education, intervention, and potentially healthcare, for the ways in which we think about using it right now.
Kate, I have a question for you, actually, because you're in this space on one side. So when I think of your question, I think a really interesting place to start would be maybe 10 years from now or 5 years from now, like a metaverse for med school, right? Like, could there be a world where, people are learning across the globe in a virtual space? I mean, you're in this through what you do at Boston Children's. What is your thought on that?
I think, I like the word that Jeffrey uses. I think it's a companion. I think it's tough to say this is going to take over, because I think you're looking at different learning styles, and to be able to balance those different learning styles as you navigate through. I love this idea. I do a lot of screen-based simulation, 360 videos and that type of thing. And it's really great to put people in that space so they can see that space in real time. And particularly right now, where capacity is such an issue in the hospitals, it allows people to be in the spaces when we can't get into the spaces for that education. But I'm not sure it's for everyone. And I think I think that's the tough thing about XR. I think it's a beautiful companion to a ton of things that we do, but there are some limitations, as with any education. I think it's a really great question. Anyone want to jump in on that too?
I actually wanted to share an example of a group that approached me, including one of our directors, who's a board certified psychiatrist. We had this concept that eventually creating continuing education programs to train clinicians, doctors, nurses in VR is a movement that we were considering doing, because it's about the adoption, right? And I agree with Jeffrey. It's a relationship, right? It's an adjunct to improving and augmenting our healthcare, the delivery of healthcare, right? And then there's all these different variables that can be used. I'm more on the provider side, right? So I'm the one like, okay, this is the delivery of care. This is how I'm treating my patients. But again, it's like creating educational programs to train clinicians on how to use XR is, I think, going to be very significant in the next 5 years.
Right. I also think, when you think of simulation, you think of suspending disbelief. I'm not sure we're at that point with the current technology to truly do that in a VR headset for that education. And I think the other piece from an educational standpoint, particularly in pediatrics, is a lot of the off-the-shelf authoring tools don't have everything that we need to do that education. So it's really about fostering some of those relationships with some of these companies that are allowing us to build off-the-shelf solutions as well. It's more thoughts I have. Jeffrey, you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I was thinking that, and it's also developmentally sensitive, right? So we're talking about pediatrics, but who's going to adopt this more readily is going to be the younger generation. So we'll see that adoption as a companion. I think, and older generations are probably going to adopt it a lot less. So I think that it may have a place later down the line when, say, wearables, biosensors, and technology is more threaded maybe into, say, glasses. Like we're all actually wearing glasses today. So it could be threaded more in that kind of route, where it's it's a much lighter lift for someone to be engaged in this immersive world when it's not a lot of hardware and technology. And so I think, like Omkar mentioned, 10 years from now, maybe this would be more of a reality, and it might be threaded into institutions. I mean, right now, to do that, like at one of our pediatric, hospital institutions, would be really challenging. It's a big switch over in hardware and infrastructure and et cetera. So I think, it is possible that later down the line, there could be some adoption, but I think it will always be a companion.
I think XR adoption as a whole, AR glasses are my dream. Like good AR glasses that last all day long, and I can see an EMR, right? And the patient's name that they want to be called versus what it says in their medical record. Yes. That would be brilliant.
I'm agnostic to tech as well, but the Google Glass, they tried to do that and they were way ahead of themselves. Well, there was a decade, 15 years ago when they first introduced it?
It was, yeah.
Yeah, they were way ahead of themselves. And so you can see that circling back at some point in a way that would be a lot more effective. To your point, EMR, integration, how you interface with a patient, that makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. So we talked about meta here. So my question here is, how do you frame medical VR versus consumer VR when you're using VR with families?
How do we explain differences? Is that what you said?
Yeah, how do you frame it? Because there's been a lot of talk about metaverse and a lot of things in the news that people are reading. So there's always the families that question why we're using this and why you're using a toy, why you're using games to help a kid with pain. Actually, this is probably more of a question for you, Jeffrey.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Believe it or not, the population that we serve at CHLA, I've conducted, experiment on hundreds of kids there in VR for pain management. And I've never had a kid say, why are you using this technology? Or I don't understand it. So for us, it's more like introducing new technology for families that they've seen commercials, but a lot of the families don't have access to this type of tech because of maybe the marginalization and economic marginalization in the populations that we serve. So they're more enthusiastic about, oh, this is kind of interesting, and the opportunity to try it. So it's all education from the ground up, just talking to them about the tech and how we use it for health purposes, and how software applications have been developed specifically for healthcare purposes, whether it's simulation, education, or intervention. I always talk about those three pillars that, and they're very open to that, and they're interested to learn about that. When they get randomized to a non-VR condition, often it's met with disappointment, right? That's the disappointment of being in a randomized control trial. But then they get an opportunity, the child gets an opportunity to play with that environment after their procedure, and they often enjoy that, and they're really excited about it. So they families and patients see the application. It's very practical. It makes a lot of sense to them. So I don't have as much sort of scratching the head. If it hasn't happened, but if it did, I mean, it's easy to talk about entertainment, right? It's purely for entertainment purposes on the outside of our institution, and on the inside of the institution, it's for medical interventions, and education and simulation. So we've had that rolled into lots of spaces in the hospital. So, but yeah, we just really haven't had those questions. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Erin, do you want to jump on and answer that?
Well, this is really good timing, actually, because a lot of the VR companies that I know that have been successful in getting their FDA approvals that allows a better pathway to to Medicare. So that my whole goal is, because I'm on the provider side, is how do we get VR to be affordable for families? Because in my experience as a clinician, I wanted so badly to get TheraVR to all of these kids that were going through COVID, but they didn't have the money to pay for a headset. So getting platforms, either if it's a single user based device, for pain management, or my system is telemedicine, right? It's the provider and the patient engagement, but it still has to be covered by insurance somehow. Is getting it to be affordable for families. And now with pediatrics, I mean, that's the tricky part, right? Is like just even the cost of medications, all of these moving parts that we have to think of. But if we can know the pathway of getting to be approved on Medicare, that's very, very important. And that's what we're doing right now, because it's not, it doesn't make sense to have consumer-based headsets for medical use. It doesn't, there's so much better head-mounted devices that are available on the market, but they're really expensive. And I mean, this was the bone of contention that Skip and I had like 6 years ago. Is like, how can we actually get quality care to our patients and still have, our innovation, but it's the manufacturing, it's the device. Like, how do we get that to be approved as a medical device? So those are the problems that we're solving right now. In terms of, it's great, having the research innovation hubs to support, the trials, but when you're commercializing this, you have to move through, I guess, different parts to make it affordable for our patients, for our caseloads.
That's great. Car, with that, just jumping on what she said, what do you think is the barriers to entry when you have some startups coming through the innovation programs?
I mean, barrier to entry, number one, as Erin said, is business model, right? So what is the cost to, and thankfully the cost of these devices and programs has gone down over the last decade. So that's good. But then what's the flip, right? Is there a reimbursement pathway? What is the value proposition to a pediatric hospital? Mostly we're fee for service. There's not really value-based arrangements that we have that we can lean on. So at least at our hospital, it's truly, what is spending $10,000-$20,000 on a handful of headsets going to yield us? And of course, there's value to be determined, but if it's not financial value, that becomes tricky. The other is the age range, right? Is this something that's going to be applicable to all patients? Or is this only applicable to certain patients of certain age? Not only because of the headset, but the product itself, the the age range that the product is targeting, if it has some sort of game or content associated with it. I still think there's some, outside of a research environment where of course you can control for and get consent for these things, I think there's still some hesitation amongst the kind of average physician, unless there's an evidence base associated with it. If it's a new use case they haven't heard, there's the Dr. Golds of the world who are fantastic and will take a chance on it, but there's others that are skeptical. I think there's still a lot of skepticism we have to navigate when we're talking about an AR or VR solution that's going to theoretically replace or do something or to augment something that has been done for decades, right? Some treatment, therapy, screening, whatever. So I think, but those are common amongst anything in medical innovation is those kind of barriers, right? Cost, adoption, science. So I think we can get there. The flip of that really quickly, which also ties back to your previous question, is it's pretty straightforward around adoption, right? If we can demonstrate to the end user, in this case, typically the parent, who is then making a decision on behalf of their child, that the mixed reality VR AR solution is A, solving a problem, and B, is doing that somehow better than the alternative, right? So if that's better than, traditional pain medication, or if that's better than them crying and screaming because they're getting a needle or a needle stick or whatever, like that's what we have to convince. And if the end user and the patient really is interested in it, I think it works. But to Aaron's point, it comes back to the business model. Who's paying for it and why?
Yeah, the patient experience seems to move ahead in pediatric facilities for sure. Jeffrey, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think I'm agnostic here, but I used to poke fun at Kaiser all the time, and I didn't used to get heat for that, but now I get heat for that because the Kaiser metric has historically just been satisfaction, right? How long did you look for parking? How many minutes did you spend with your physician? Were they helpful at the front desk? How long did it take for pharmacy to fill your prescription? And those were their primary outcomes and drivers, right? And then, fast forward 10 years, and it's like now other pediatric facilities are doing the same thing where our primary metrics and health outcomes are really about satisfaction. So for us, let's just talk about VR for venipuncture as an example. If kids are having better experiences and phlebotomists are having better experiences and parents are having better experiences, that's a capital W. That's a big win, right? Are they making money? No, not yet. There is no reimbursement for VR yet for that purpose. Maybe one day, and I've been talking about this for as long as I've been in the field, wouldn't it be great if VR was always paired with venipuncture? A kid goes to phlebotomy, to the lab, and it's an automatically dropped associated cost. If the kid chooses VR, then the payer is reimbursing the hospital for these. That would be perfect. It seems so easy, right? They used to do that with vapocoolant, right? Which was the spray. Every time a doctor would drop an order for a blood draw, vapocoolant would be associated with it. Sometimes the kid would say yes, sometimes the kid would say no. If they use vapocoolant, then they check that, and then a bill was dropped and reimbursement followed, right? So it's not a really complicated model. We know that VR is superior for managing anxiety and pain and makes the process a lot quicker, right? You don't have the kids screaming and crying and holding them down. You have to poke them 3, 4, or 5 times. You can usually get it just in one stick and you move along, and you actually have a quicker throughput when it's not a research study, right? It's just happening clinically. So hopefully one day that kind of thing can happen. And then what you will see when you contact those families is they're a lot happier with the care they're receiving. And then this will extend naturally into other procedures. I think what the kind of work that I'm doing right now and others have been doing is VR in lieu of sedation, right? Can we be sedation sparing in certain acute procedures that would otherwise usually require sedation? And what are all the negative implications of a child receiving sedation? And what if that kid has to receive sedation for certain procedures 15, 20, 30 times a year? What's the neurological implications of being exposed to that medication 25 or 30 times in a year? There's data that suggests it impairs cognitive functioning and et cetera. So, hey, let's stop exposing kids to general anesthesia if we can, right? And VR can replace sedation in some cases. There's some data out there right now. We're collecting more data in a bunch of varieties of areas and clinics, inpatient and out, to see if it's true or not, right? So that's kind of cool stuff. How is payers going to drop or accept that they want to pay for that? I mean, that's the negotiation of that is still to be determined. Are parents happier that their kids don't have to do a PACU visit after general anesthesia? Heck yeah, because the procedure is done and they're off to school and they're back to work, or they're going to go take care of their other kids. So there's so many wins associated with VR in lieu of sedation. So the customer satisfaction scores are going to drive up. People are going to be happier. They're going to be getting this great, innovative, futuristic care, right? That's making their lives so much better. But we still have to convince payers to pay for that. So there's two models: money driving the business, or the customer satisfaction scores driving the business, and then driving more people to that particular institution because their scores are so high. Other families are like, hey, I want to go to that institution because they're doing really cool stuff. So I think there's a couple different paradigms, and I think we're trying to work on both. Right, it would be great to be reimbursed for digital therapeutic interventions, but I also think it's naturally going to drive up customer satisfaction scores for our entire institution. So I feel good about that part.
I definitely agree with that. I think it definitely creates influences, as we say, and then one friend tells another, and then it moves on from there.
Oh, absolutely.
Omkar, what are your thoughts about getting funding? Because you're in this space of trying to support some of the folks like myself in getting funding for some of these initiatives.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest, probably least scalable answer is philanthropy. I mean, I think there is philanthropy that does pay for the kinds of work that Dr. Gold was talking about. There's also then grant funding as well, which is helpful to kind of study this stuff. I think where my mind went to what Dr. Gold was saying is, I would love, and I don't know who else is attending this conference, but if you're watching and you happen to be fitting this space, contact us. I want to see if we can do demonstration projects with health plans, right? So with that sedation example, is there a model where there's some sort of risk sharing here where it's like, let's take 30 patients and come up with some mechanism by which, if we were to, to use this solution, we think we will be able to, on these 30 kids, use less sedation than we typically would in a normal set of 30 patients. And of course, that's what your research is showing, but could we incorporate a health plan into that model to then, like other digital therapeutics, to then build a reimbursement mechanism beyond that? So same with your concept around venipuncture and, the potential application of how a payer could pay for that. So that seems like an interesting place. I don't know how many health plans are doing interesting kind of funded kind of research or associated research related to VR. I know there are many, but I know there are some. I don't know how many and how many are actively looking in pediatrics specifically, but that's where my mind goes around kind of where to go, because that's more scalable than, of course, it's nice to get some philanthropy and support it, and that's always a healthy thing. But if we can get the health plans to help fund this stuff, I think that's a really win-win situation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great insight. I think really important now as we're moving ahead, and it's like every year there's updated technology. So to keep up with that, I think the health plan is probably the way to go. Erin, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just this is just going back to when I was talking to Brennan before our panel, is, with this new legislation that's been passed with Congress, I believe that companies like myself who are in the advocacy, not just the business, we're actually passing legislation and policy to have at the state level and also at the federal level, being allowed to have our technologies be adopted under the Telemedicine Act. So I actually created the first chapter under the American Telemedicine Association for VR, and VR as a conduit as telemedicine. And I really appreciate Jeffrey talking about like how, let's look at it as replacing the sedation medication, right? So like I'm on the psych side. So my vision was, how do we reduce the over medication of kids? I worked in inpatient, outpatient in psychiatry. So I worked in the trenches. And one of the things that really bothered me, and actually it's disturbing, is using so much drug as opposed to true direct psychotherapy to heal a child. And then of course there's all these other, comorbid issues, but if we can actually get that accepted through the healthcare plans, through the committees, knowing that this is a solution, and look at the value out of this. Well, look at the damage that you can do, like prescribing too many different drugs to a 9-year-old when you could be using innovation to help heal that child instead, is healthier. And it's about the outcomes too. Are the parents happy? Are they satisfied, right? Because it's about those outcomes and showing that your innovation is creating a real value, and not just to the hospital, but to the patients, and it's long-term. So I think that we're going to have a lot easier time moving and like addressing pediatrics now because of that bill that was just passed. And the coalition that we have to do as VR companies in the virtual medicine space is to work with policy. Those are my thoughts.
But that was something that you weren't planning as you started the trajectory of starting your VR company.
Yeah.
The question that I always get is, what are the limitations of using virtual reality with children? People seem to ask that question all the time, and I'll throw that one over to you, Jeffrey.
I think before we move off that last question, Kate, do you want to add anything to your sense of, where VR sits and, benefits, customer satisfaction, payer? Do you have thoughts about that from your lens?
I would add, but they're now drilling outside my window, so I'm quickly moving on so you don't hear the drilling right now.
Oh, okay. Just come back to it.
Can I throw one, maybe while the drilling is going on, I want to throw a thought that Aaron made me think of. So I don't know what you think of your company as, Aaron, but the way you described it, it sounds like you're thinking of yourself more as a mental health company, which is interesting from the sense of, I think to certain degrees, in my opinion, some companies do a disservice if they describe themselves or technology as a VR first. I think the VR is the modality, but ultimately what you're solving for mental health. Other people are solving for pain and other things like that. I think the more we lead with technology, of course, this audience makes sense. It's an affinity group of people that think like this. But I think if we think more broadly about what we're trying to solve, and VR, AR, mixed, whatever is the modality of doing it, I think we will end up feeling more mainstream, less risky, and more normalized to the people that make decisions in organizations that we're trying to influence, than coming in saying, hey, it's VR first. And again, there's just an opinion of one, but I think that's an interesting kind of paradigm shift that we should start thinking about as we think about normalizing this entire space.
Yeah, that's the whole mission, is to standardize the technology so that government bodies, the insurers, the payers recognize that as this is billable under insurance. This is standardized. And that's what I've been doing for the last 2 years. And we did it, right? We actually did it. And so I commend all of my other partners in VR who are doing this, like HealthXR, and they were all in that movement of, it's a provider patient experience. It's not just the technology, but we're coming in as the service, right? And so I completely agree with you, Amkar. It's like, I'm on the behavioral healthcare side, and we're patent pending. Where it's again, all of us are in the same umbrella, but coming in as the innovation and knowing that we're solving this problem, but to standardize it is the pathway. Sorry, Jeffrey, go ahead.
No, I just think that's great, because we always do lead with the tech. I mean, even the name of this conference, right, is, V for Virtual Med 22, is we always are leading with the technology, but we should be leading with the areas, right? The areas and I think the solution, like you were saying, I just wanted to applaud that comment from both of you and say that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's a great insight. This is something that I'm not used to doing, actually. I'm usually, from the hackathon side, this is the problem, here's a solution. But with this technology, I seem to start with the tech versus the solution, which is just a backwards way for me to think, and really for anyone else to think, in my opinion.
I just want to add something in case they're still drilling by your house. The I'm taking advantage of the noise, the ambient noise. Well, I mean, we recruited a kid this morning for a transnasal endoscopy, right? And we used VR during, it's called a TNE, and so the kid didn't have to be nothing per oral the night before, right? So they didn't have to starve and not have any liquids and no food and not have to plan to miss school and for the family to miss work, and who knew what was going to happen with the other children, and et cetera, et cetera. So they came in, they had their check-in, the docs met with them, we got them locked into their VR headset, they went through the scoping while they were inside of the virtual environment, and then they were done, and that was it. And the kid got out of the chair and literally skipped down the hall because they're going to go to school. And the mom was like, you ready for school? And the patient was like, yep. And that was it. And if you compare that on a timeline for somebody who has to get sedated for the same transnasal endoscopy, I mean, it's not comparable. It's just, it just blows your mind. You know, what happens the night before, the arrival, the pre-sedation, the sedation, then the feeling dizzy or the nauseous or the groggy or the PACU repair, like, you know, recovery. And then everyone has to miss school, everybody has to miss work. Who knows what happens to the other parts of the family. And maybe that PACU stay is 45 minutes, maybe it's an hour and a half, maybe it's 3 hours. It just depends on how that child responded to the anesthesia. And it's not to demonize anesthesia. Anesthesia has a place. But if we can use a non-medication, this is to Aaron's point, if we can use a non-medication treatment that has as good of outcomes, if not better, as a function of sparing sedation and then all the associated negative consequences of it, then that's a big win. And so then this kid just skips down the hall and goes to school, and everybody returns to business as usual, which could have never been the case if that child had been sedated. So I just wanted to illuminate that, and there's so many places where that solution can be plugged in, and again, whether it's reimbursed or whether it's just a priceless health outcome for the child and the family, you know, both are really great success stories.
I think from the admin side, the throughput of that just speaks volumes. I mean, you can increase capacity and get more patients through. That makes complete sense. Aaron, do you want to add something? I'm sorry.
And not bottleneck anesthesia or the PACU, right? Like what you were just saying. Just adding
exactly. My first study actually looked at does VR impede the nursing flow in a GPU, a gastroenterology procedure unit, and we did in fact impede the nursing flow, but ultimately the children actually didn't require any pre-procedural medications. They had their procedure, came back, and as you said, the PACU time was cut in half. So we benefited on the other side. This is something that we looked at, but it was a huge benefit from the other side.
Right.
Erin, do you want to share an experience that you've had with?
Yeah, actually, thank you, Jeffrey, because I just had a flashback to one of our potential hospitals that approached us with a problem with the ER department. So my technology was designed for telemedicine for remote patient care, but it can also be used on site. And we had a pediatric emergency physician approach us and said, well, we're looking for something to solve this problem that we're having. We've got these kids in the ER, and we don't have enough beds for them. They're being put into office spaces and stuff, but they're extremely anxious, depressed, and lonely. And what normally happens, like at least in my old hospital, is they give them a bunch of drugs, right, to sedate them, like to calm them down. But we were coming in as no, we're going to come in as providing telemedicine or telepsych using a headset so that the provider can be in there with that kid and do say mindfulness-based stress reduction or anxiety CBT or DBT skills. And that just kind of parallels to what Jeffrey was saying, is about well, there's the medications, but look at this other approach that we can use to solve the problem. And it's better because it's more efficient it's more efficient. And I think that's the benefit of using XR technologies now in medicine, is it's improving the efficiency and the access to care, as opposed to, all of the other burdensome, the trial and the burden that the family and the patients have to go through, going through the regular, old ways. Is looking at it as, and that's just a case scenario that I had, which I think can be extreme value add in emergency psych. And especially now that we're moving into, this is the year of 988. Like we've got a new 911 line coming out for psych care. And you can marry that with TheraVR, right? Because it is telemedicine. But I think definitely looking at new solutions and addressing reducing harm to the patient. That's what I wanted to try and say is, and from my clinical background, that was everything that galvanized my innovation, was about reducing harm to the patient. And I think this is all coincides with our work, either in pain management, but I'm on the psych side. So this is a little case study or a case example that happened to me recently.
Yeah, can I add something, Kate, really quick?
Please.
And what's interesting too is that I don't want any of us to demonize pharmaceuticals, because I think it has a place on the show, right? There's a place for it in care. I think what's interesting with the non-medication interventions, whether it's XR, VR, mindfulness practice, whatever it is in behavioral health or pain management or stress management, is the idea that children or even adult patients that have chronic illnesses, right, where they require many visits and procedures and hospitalizations and et cetera, that's where a lot of this becomes even more critical, because of the exposure to medicalization. And we all know the trauma that can come along with medicalization for kids, adolescents, young adults, et cetera. In the one-off patient who ends up in the emergency department with a broken bone or whatever, and then, gets a pain med or whatever, and then gets fixed and then discharged, like probably not a big deal. VR could be great for that, but it's those more complex patients that are like really returning frequently for care that I think we could get a big benefit with that population. And again, at Children's LA, we like 75% of our patients returning to the hospital are patients who have chronic illness of all types of subspecialty needs. So that's where I think there's, again, big bang for the buck, or good intervention for these non-medication types of solutions.
So a thought that I had, it was actually something Omkar said, and it's actually something you said too, because we have so many patients returning with chronic illnesses. How do you keep the content fresh? I think the content for me is one of the biggest challenges that we have in VR. Something as simple as finding, this was something that happened about 3 years ago, we couldn't find content that we could use with a patient that was supine. So what are your thoughts about that?
Oh, so many thoughts. I mean, I work with a company, and it's, the running joke is content is king, right? Or queen, whatever you want to say, but it's all about the content. And when I did my first research study on with virtual reality, there was one environment available, one, that was it. So that's what I used. And it was a great, interesting environment. I actually contacted software companies and gaming companies, including EA, and said, hey, do you want to partner with CHLA to build some really cool content for kids with healthcare problems for all these different reasons? And of course, the answer I got back was no, because this was like 2003 or 4, somewhere there. Now you have thousands, right? Thousands of environments available. The problem is, and some beautiful stuff, right? The problem is that they haven't been empirically tested, right? It's not that they don't exist. They do exist. They're everywhere. There's a whole YouTube channel dedicated to virtual environments. You have companies making virtual environments, some not so great, and some that are really beautiful and engaging. To keep it fresh is to have to personally scroll through them and make determinations and pilot them and test them with kids. And, that's what we end up doing, because none of them, or very few of them, I should say, have any evidence around their use for a particular fill in the blank therapeutic intervention, whatever that case might be. So I tend to have a handful of environments that make sense to me. And we, like Omkar mentioned earlier, that I've been courageous enough to go on a limb with some environments that have never been tested. So I test them. I run the risk, could turn up with, a handful of mud, or, we could be shooting to the stars. So I take those risks based on some piloting with kids to determine which environments are best. And, you can also do that with content experts, other VR experts who've worked in the space. You can share content and get feedback from them and talk about its utility. Some are 2, 3, 5 minute scenarios. Some are 15, 20 minute scenarios. Some go on for as long as an hour that are like adventure scenarios, things like that. So you have to figure out what's the problem you're trying to solve, and then what's a child-friendly environment. We're talking about pediatrics. It has to be something that makes sense for kids and is engaging. So to your point about keeping it fresh, if you have a kid who's routinely returning, sometimes they have their own preference for what they want to play, or what they want to do. Some of them, we've used some content from Applied VR called Bear Blast for a number of our studies. And even, kids love that, and they'll do it a second and a third and a fourth time. Applied's come out with some other newer environments that are similar that we're starting to pilot on kids right now. You have to be willing to try things out to determine that they are or aren't any good or evidence-based for that population, for that particular procedure. So, and that takes more time. I always talk about the VR pharmacy. I feel like I repeat myself, maybe even at this conference, right, from year to year. But the VR pharmacy is the dream that there's 100 scenarios that have been evidence-based tested for anxiety, pain management, fear, phobias, whatever it is, and that the kid can go click, click, click. I want this one. I want this one. I want this one. They can customize. They can select them for themselves, and they've been science-based. I mean, that's the perfect dream. That's going to take a really long time.
Yeah. With that, actually, you brought this word up, Erin. That word, standardization. So when you are rolling this out in a hospital, or a hospital comes to you and says, I'm interested in rolling this out, what is your thought about standardization? So I think one of the things that we ran into is we had so many different headsets from different companies, and great companies at that. We had Kind, we had Applied, and they have some fantastic things with Starlight. It just was endless. But with that came its own challenges, because you had one person who knew how to use this headset, one person who knew how to use that one. So I'm just curious of what your thoughts are about that.
Well, my professional opinion, in terms of hardware, I believe that Pico Technologies is best for pediatrics, just because of the ergonomics. Because you got little heads, you got little bodies, and again, I'm all about patient safety, and so our pediatric model is using Pico Neo 3i. Young adults, we can use Oculus. We don't get a lot of complaints from 20-year-olds, but when it comes to kids, is finding the right hardware that is appropriate. And again, to Jeffrey's point, is what are you treating, right? What are you treating? Is it pain management? Is it pre and post procedures, for surgery? And, for me, I'm in telepsych, right? My product is specifically designed to heal mental illness. And, specifically like my, one of my case studies was treating a 10-year-old who had severe encopresis, PTSD, had been homeschooled for 16 months. And I tested this, just like what Jeffrey was talking about. I went from just regular telemedicine Zoom conferencing to using my platform, and there was significant improvement and actually cured her encopresis. But the testing the environments, making sure that they're clinically appropriate, that's part of standardization too, is like you have to qualify your patient for VR first to make sure that you just can't take anybody and put a VR headset on them. You have to qualify them. And in terms of the content, testing And getting the clinical feedback of the provider is very important. And that's part of the standardization, is to constantly test and modify and improve your product to the point where it's, there's consistency in those outcomes. Like, for example, like we had just one prototype in the beginning, and that shifted into 7 different clinical scenes. But all of my friends who are doctors, psychiatrists, licensed mental health care professionals, and chief innovation officers would provide the feedback to me before I would even, show this to a patient, right? And that's really important, is to get it to be clinically appropriate, safe. And then how do we keep the content more exciting? If you have a repeat patient that keeps coming to the hospital, well, adding the features and assets, right? Customization. So like with TheraVR, we have over 200 different avatars. And that's the unique delivery of care, is the patient chooses what the doctor looks like, right? So you give them that empowerment, and that gives them enough, they don't get bored. Like kids get bored really fast, right? So getting them to be able to have this new environment, new avatars, but then we also have features within the VR now that are customizable. But again, standardization is getting that quality assurance and making it fit for the hospital system. And again, it's like a lot of testing and clinical feedback. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you, Jeffrey, in regards to throwing it in the hands of kids, though, for sure. It's they will tell you anything. They'll tell you things that you never even looked at when you use the experience from an adult perspective.
Yeah. I want to add also to what the discussion was around the hardware part, because you said, how do you pick, how do you choose, how do you know? It's complicated because, I agree with Aaron. I like the Pico. It's, it's basically built in the same manufacturing site as the Oculus, and it has better graphics. It is so I'm looking for. It's not proprietary. Like Oculus has a proprietary library. You have to, purchase that or get into that, and that's not the case with the Pico. So that does leave it a little bit more open for adding content where you can't on the Oculus. So that's that's a division in the road. So anyway, but the problem on the user side is, you have to train and teach people how to actually use the tech. You just don't, with most of the tech we're talking about that's commercial off the shelf, you have to train, teach, deal with hygiene. We always talk about that. You have to deal with keeping it charged. You have to keep the updates, everything that's normal to managing tech. You can't just put it in the hands of a random person who forgets about it, or doesn't keep it clean, or doesn't keep it charged or updated, and then it won't be functional anymore. There are some companies, and I never know what the rules are about saying the names of companies on this call, but so I'll just keep it neutral. But there are companies that are building units that are specifically like medical grade for the purposes of VR, for the purposes of hospital use, and are using them in lots of places. They've published very little. They have big claims. They publish little to really stand on a leg, but they did customize a particular product to be very fitting for all kinds of environments and super easy to use. And so that's, I think, one of their selling points is like, hey, this is super easy to use. Anybody can use it. You just put it on the kid and you're off to the races. I don't know, again, the data isn't present to establish that as the go-to product, but the utility of it, boots on the ground, is kind of nice, because if it's true that you just click it in to the kids, onto the kid's head and they're off to the races, that's great. The user friendliness is a huge part. We've watched, you work at a children's hospital, Kate, lots of philanthropic people make really fabulous donations of really incredible stuff, and it gets used for a couple of weeks, and then it finds its way into the corner, and it's unplugged, it's not charged, it gets dusty, something gets broken, it doesn't get used anymore, and it just kind of goes quietly into the night, right? And so it really does require a workforce to manage the tech, and then on top of that, then to operate the tech.
Yeah, I think I agree. Yeah, that onboarding process is huge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Omkar.
No. The whole thing and all of this conversation stems back to your original question about standardization. I mean, I think that's the ideal next stage, right? How do we turn this technology into something that, beyond the clinical benefits or the business benefits, whatever, however you want to think about it, can be deployed in a way that's ideally seamless when it comes to workflow, right? Like putting this on, it's not this big ordeal. It's not something, and I think we've done that, through our venipuncture program. I think that's been great, but it took a while to get there where, it's there, the devices are charged, they're clean, everything that you guys were just talking about. But like, that's, I think, where we have to get to, especially if it's not a consistent thing. If it's not something we're doing for every patient, if it's something we're doing for every 10th patient, every 20th patient, it becomes harder. And I think that's going to be the key element, especially because, at least in many children's hospitals, there's not a lot of extra staff just like running around being able to do this. You talked about child life earlier. We over rely on them. I think they're amazing and they do such great work, but we rely on them to do a lot of things. And they're not tech support. They're not supposed to be. They're not the ones who need to be troubleshooting when somebody can't figure out what's going on with their device. And for this to be cost effective, you need it to be something that ideally the patient can operate on their own. Anyway, I think standardization is key. I think autonomous is another element of this, which I think is helpful too, right? Like, you can give a kid an iPad and they can do something and use it. You don't have to stand over and watch them use the iPad. If we can get to that same place with VR and AR, I think that's great, because that's going to help us alleviate some other, workflow related challenges on a very stretched and complicated situation right now with our workflow, our workforce, excuse me.
Yeah, that's really great insight. I definitely can see creating, we talk about adoption, right? And if we have a clinician that does use a VR headset, it's not charged, it doesn't work for them. That's when we do have the detractors that jump on board and say, well, it's never working, it's not charged, or whatever the case may be. I couldn't see what they were looking at. It doesn't stream, it doesn't mirror, for whatever use case that they're looking at. So I would absolutely love to see a standardization. Now, again, device agnostic, but what I found interesting, again, I use VR for a lot of training with nursing staff, and put a VR headset on. They're challenged a little bit, and they have to kind of explore the space a little bit, explore the controllers, etc. I put a HoloLens on, and they knew exactly what to do. It was not even a lesson. They just put it on and knew, just pressing the air. I mean, it was such an interesting thing for me to watch with that. I don't know if you guys had that experience.
That's great.
And yet I don't have great use cases for the HoloLens yet. We're working on it. We're definitely working on it. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just actually wanted to just respond to what Amkar was saying about the challenges of training your staff or your workforce in knowing that, okay, you have this new instrument and there's protocols, right? You have to make sure it's charged. There's fresh batteries in the hand controllers. And I think that goes back on the company. It goes back on us as a company have to, really succinctly train the staff in the hospitals on how to use this new medical device, right? And there's protocols, and it's the protocols that are most important when you're using this in an institution. And so even if you're not consistently using VR with your patients, is having like say it's a room or it's an office where it has the charging stations and it has clean box and all of those things that you have to prep for clinical care. And I think that's really simple. Like in my company, we have clinical training handbooks. We have safety protocol procedures. We go in and we train the clinicians. And then it's the company's responsibility, I think, in terms of standardization, is they provide that back-end support, that IT support, customer support all the time. And that's what, instead of just being a product, you're a service as well. And I think that's part of the standardization, is to make sure that we as a company are providing that safety for the hospitals.
I agree 100%. I think that's a crucial part of what differentiates these companies. I do have a question, which I realize I'm not moderating this, but I'm just going to throw it out.
This is podcasting, man. You do whatever.
I'll do me. So here's it relates to this, and I'm curious to get everyone's thoughts on this. So naturally, a lot of use cases in this entire space have gravitated towards in-hospital use. What I'm not sure about is that are largely out of kind of convenience / kind of structures, or if we were to kind of blanketly think about where could this technology be best utilized? Is it in the home? And our problem is, how do we get these devices to the home, and how is it scalable? But I feel like we're overly relying on these devices being in clinical settings, whether it's a clinic or a hospital or something like that. But I don't see a lot of, and there's some, but there's not a ton of innovation that's been done around the, at home piece. There's been some, but it seems like it's largely because of the barriers of scaling this to the home environment, less about, the actual applicability from a use case perspective. But curious to get people's thoughts on it.
Well, that's my company. That's exactly, it's all remote patient access. So if you were to say, take TheraVR for your outpatient, think of that headset as a medical bracelet. So that actually goes home with the patient, and it's encrypted, it's HIPAA compliant. That's a use case scenario. In terms of the usage, right? It's that really depends on your patient care at the hospital. When do they send the headset back? Do they keep it? If it's a chronic patient like Jeffrey's population that are repeat, they have to have constant care, is think about having the headset at home, or we call it home hospitalization, right? Is keeping it there. But it belongs to children's. It's like a medical bracelet. But for my business, in telehealth, there's only so many sessions that you might be seeing that kid, and they either decide to keep the headset, or they can send it back to us. But that's completely our platform.
Which is great. So do you think we'll see more of that? I'm curious about whether this group thinks we're going to see more kind of virtual augmented reality for healthcare in the home, or just away from physical institutions like hospitals and clinics. Obviously, you're doing it. I'm curious about others.
Oh, totally, because we're integrating wearables with telemedicine all right now. So wearables like HRV devices, Apple Watches. My technology right now, we're experimenting using the API. It's heart rate variability that we can actually measure by using the lens on your camera. There's and if you think for kids, right? Because kids are squirmy. How can we capture their HRV, right? But they know their phones really well, so they just put their finger on the lens, and we can capture their HRV readings. That improves standard of care for remote patient access, right? Because there's always risks involved with telemedicine. But if you have the right tools in place, if we're using XR for treatment at home, is to make sure that we have those extra tools for patient safety. I totally believe that this is going to be for more use for home hospitalization, for sure.
I hope so, Omkar. I really do. I'm sure, Jeffrey, you can probably jump in with this one too. We're looking at it for pain treatment for kids with functional abdominal pain instead of medications. And I'm sure you have some studies going on. I do think there's, of course, the challenges of tracking the headsets, making sure they work in the home environment. Do they have internet if it needs internet? Do they have to sign into anything? Who's on call to deal with some of the troubleshooting challenges that they may have along the way. And again, it's that balance there. And realistically, that's great. And I think, Erin, you spoke to this, that it's the company's option to provide that. But realistically, in clinical environments, fast-paced clinical environments, that's tough to put on a company. And it's tough to put on families when they're running around as well. Jeffrey,
Right.
jump in.
Well, yeah, if you think back about 10 years or so ago when Google Cardboard came out, see, this is a solution in reverse. every kid's got a smartphone. So like, let's just give them a headset and they can drive all their own content. But what we quickly learned is that the Google Cardboard really wasn't as efficacious or effective as were the full head mounted display VR immersive experience. They weren't that immersive. It was basically like just taking your phone and just sticking it in front of your eyes was not cutting it. So that was an attempt at a solution to make it more agnostic to home, to community, to hospital. Now, we know that, one company, Applied VR got, they got FDA approval for their home kit for chronic low back pain, right? So they actually got FDA approval for that device and that software for adults. Specifically, it has one specific indication, which is chronic low back pain. So we know that there are devices making their way into the home. But again, the issue of like dose effect, right? This is all the tracking. How do we know the kid wore it, used it, and for how long, and that it was working seamlessly, and it was delivering what we think it delivers, so that at the end when we measure them and they're like, oh, they didn't really do very well. Well, is that because the tech didn't work as a solution, or was it because they just had a very minuscule dose effect of the environments that they were watching, practicing, et cetera? So I think having it be, I think this is what Omkar was alluding to, having it be more seamless between home and hospital, outpatient and inpatient, I think that delivers the best kind of care. And I think VR has to find its way into that space. It's just going to have all those challenges that everyone's talking about. We'll talk about them today, and in 10 years from now, we'll still be talking about the challenges of how do we get families internet? How do we track the headsets? Is it running smoothly or correctly? And are the kids getting the best effect with the dose that they're taking at their home, as opposed to in the hospital where they're being monitored closely by their clinician?
So here's my question though, or my thought. So, we think of, smart telehealth, and the fact that everyone has a smartphone, or not everybody, many people have a smartphone or a computer, right? So we were really building, what we were building was the workflows and the software technology to enable that revolution, right? And then you could think back to, other digital therapeutics and the fact that people have phones and iPads and whatever else. So I guess what I'm curious about is like, as a little industry within digital health, does the focus shift more towards software? Like going back to Kate's first question around the metaverse, like, are we thinking that in 10 years, everyone's going to have, or lots of people are going to have this environment in their own world? Like everyone has a smartphone, right? So is that what we're thinking about? Or are we thinking that that's not going to be the case? And I don't know if any of us knows the answer to that, but I think that's an interesting way of thinking about it. Like, I guess my equivalent would be like, if a decade ago we were building tablets and smartphones so that we would enable people to do digital therapeutics or even telehealth, that would have been perhaps a waste of time and money, whereas we should have been focused on the software. So is that a similar world? Like if we're moving towards a metaverse as a culture or as a society, if that's what, people want us to think, should we be focusing on, okay, well, everyone will have a headset. Let's figure out how we deploy software. And yeah, I'm not saying that's the case. I'm curious to get people's thoughts.
Yeah, I can add to that. So solving that problem, or, talking about like, who's taking care of the headset? Are they using it properly? All of that stuff. So one of the things about what we're doing is we're creating a user interface for the clinician. So having a provider portal is really important. So like, say you're on site at the hospital, you are running the software for the headsets for your patients. And that's a solution, is having a dashboard where you can see, okay, they've put it on, they've actually, you're reading the data that is being captured through their HRV. As a company, it's our job to see on the back end the information that is being captured from usage of the software. That's what, I don't know how to explain it properly, but you have to have a system in place that if you're using this for remote patient access, and I've been doing this for the last 2 years with my own caseload, is, okay, that kid's like in their house and they're young, they're under the age of 15. Like, how do I know that they're charging their headset? How do I know that they've got fresh batteries in the hand controllers? How do I know if they're using it properly? Again, it's my responsibility, the company's responsibility, to have all of these protocols in place. In terms of the user interface, we created basically it's a provider portal, and that provider portal has all of the moving parts and the information for remote patient access. We're considering building our own EMR for triage, and actually being able to communicate the electronic medical records with other institutions. But it's having the quality assurance that's in place for the hospital system. That's one of the big things that we have to address for using this for home hospitalization. Does that kind of make sense? Because you have to have the VR, you have the product, but you have to make sure that it's safe in terms of 24-hour access, like customer support, IT support, and then monitoring the technology in terms of its usage, both clinically, but also just as a product.
I kind of look at it like medication adherence. And I think that's probably what you're looking at, Omkar, is like, how do you guarantee that the patient's going to use it? Like dream sequence of mine, I would love to see AR headsets on everyone in the future. That's my metaverse, because I still like to be in real life, be able to see people and have that engagement. But you can go deep enough that it would allow you to just be. How's that?
Yeah, I think to Omkar's question, the companies that can make this product more simple to use, or more idiot proof, basically, for everybody, not talking about patients and families. I'm talking about healthcare providers. I think money spent in that kind of development would be money well spent, because that still is the product that needs to deliver the content.
Right.
So, and then if you're able to make the product, the headset, whatever it is, AR, XR, VR, if you're able to make it be so simple that anybody can operate it, then you can just load it with all kinds of content, and then get the price point down low enough where, I wouldn't say disposable, but that wouldn't be horrible, but to the point where it's near disposable, that kids can have them at school, they can have them at home, they can have them at the hospital, that it's as common as a pencil, but capable of delivering the content that we're talking about. I think that would be a really nice solution, and it would be money well spent, because I don't think the interventions that we do, whether VR, AR, or XR, I don't think that delivery system of that content is going to change very dramatically. I think we're still putting stuff in front of people's faces.
Right. No, it all makes sense. I think when the metaverse kind of conversation came up, not just here, but when they announced, when all these tech companies are talking about it now, my head went to, are we seeing a world where 5 years from now, everyone has a smartphone that basically functions as a mixed reality device? Like, I don't know how that would look like, but it's not far-fetched, right? If from a social media standpoint, technology is going that way, are we looking at a world where in 5 years, everyone comes in with a headset, and now we're basically putting in medical software content to enable it? Or maybe not, but that's an interesting kind of thought, because one of the biggest barriers to whether it's home or hospital use has been the cost of the headset, right? Paying for the headset, maintaining it, managing it is the barrier to us adopting this stuff. If people walk in with their own devices, it's no different than putting on some app that Child Light puts on right now on an iPad, because everyone has, uses that technology. So that's what I'm interested to see, is where the kind of commercial use of the metaverse kind of goes, and does that translate into like hardware adoption or hardware accessibility of mixed reality for the masses? Because if that does, then that changes the course of all these projects we're working on.
Yeah, exactly. Because again, it's like the metaverse is like Oculus driven, but it's like that would be a fantastic solution to make everything agnostic in terms of the hardware, right? Because I'm
I think
thinking,
you'd find maybe the same situation you have with smartphones right now, though. It's like you have the newest camera that does different things. Excuse me, I think that the hardware will be the same. It would just every year be something different. So how do we keep up with the Joneses in regards to the hardware?
Mhm.
Thoughts, Jeffrey?
No, I think I agree with what Omkar was suggesting. And I think, I had this idea that, you drop your iPhone in the room and now you're in this whole universe, right? You have nothing on your face, but your phone's generating this environment that you can interact with, right? That's almost Matrix-like, right? And who knows, with the complexities of the way they developed the smartphone, that might be possible. It's funny because when I was doing this VR work back in the clinics, maybe in the mid 2000s, and I met with some Hollywood people who were like, hey, we want to transform your clinics into these immersive experiences. I'm like, well, what the hell is that going to look like? And they're like, well, we're going to put flat screens on the floor, on the walls, on the ceiling. And then when the kid comes in, they can select any environment that they want and they can be fully immersed in this cave-like experience, right? And I'm like, yeah, we'll never get past Jayco. Like, I mean, I can't, like if I was in private practice on the street corner, like I could probably pull that off, but that's never going to happen inside of a hospital clinic room, right? But the idea was kind of cool. It wasn't a device on the face. It was a transforming a room into a cave where the kid could choose any immersive experience and then go through a medical procedure or have their appointment or whatever. And just, it's called, manipulating the environment, right? For ease and safety and for comfort. And but it never happened because it was just never going to happen.
Sounds cool. And yes, I will buy your smartphone if you want to create that. I'm totally on board.
Right.
I'll be an early adopter.
Yeah, it's going to project.
The other side of that, and we haven't talked much about AR on this call as much as VR, but and I hate making predictions because Brendan did say this would be available forever on the internet. But if there's a prediction I were to make, I think the consumer adoption of AR is going to speed up quite a bit over the next many years. It already is, and I could see a world where, especially if it's smartphone oriented AR, that we could see a lot of applications both on the patient and provider side for it, because I think it'll be more commonplace for end users to be able to use that for Google Maps, navigation, games, other things that they play, whatever else. But I think applying that to then, we're doing a project at CHLA around using AR for physical therapy and rehab. And that's, it's a great way to kind of augment that experience, which is traditionally fairly kind of, not gamified and maybe boring and not, explicitly engaging, but we're doing that and that's fun. There's a lot of other use cases you could apply to that, but I think I could see a world where that picks up quite a bit because you've got, again, you don't have the hardware limitation from a cost perspective, a cleaning perspective, a maintenance perspective, right? Everyone has a phone. In theory, they could use their own device and they could use it to augment their healthcare experience, whatever that looks like.
I think that's true. If you think of the AR tech similar to what a laptop is to a desktop, right? I think that kind of nails it because, we all got our first PCs whenever we got them and we were like, wow, it's amazing. And it was like, took up a 6x8 foot desk, right? With a dot matrix printer that took all night long to print out your analyses for your dissertation or whatever. Now I'm just dating myself. But the point is that then the laptop came along and it was like, wow, I can carry this and I can go to a coffee shop, right? So I think AR is I think that's spot on. Like AR could be that technology that's way more portable and is more universal to everybody's phone, right? And then all you need to do is just buy your HoloLens or your glass headset. Companies are making that, just to pop your phone in there and have your AR experience. So, I mean, I definitely think that that's a really nice comparison and probably true. It's easier to adopt.
I like your analogy with the laptop and the desktop.
Yeah.
Now, as I sit on the desktop, I also think that the use cases for VR to be totally immersed in an environment, it's just that they do a better job with it. And I think it's just going to get better and better as the technology gets better and better.
Yeah.
But I am 100% on the AR bandwagon for sure, is the first to be adopted by more than VRs right now.
I just had a quick question though to all of you though, that I totally agree with AR, but I'm thinking as a clinician, how accurate is it for picking up, like we use 6 degrees of freedom in VR, like the neurological aspect of like how like what is the efficacy of using AR for treatment?
I think they're solving different problems. I think VR is truly around creating that, alternative kind of experience and truly immersing you in a different experience. I think AR is how can I just add something additional to my traditional sight and reality experience to add some additional benefit and value. So even though we mix them together in this kind of mixed reality world, in my opinion, they're different, right? They're different use cases, different problems they're solving. I don't think you're immersing anybody into something else when you're doing AR. I think you're just adding to their traditional field, which has its value. And then I think there's similarly VR where you're doing something totally different. So I don't think one replaces the other. My comment earlier was around adoption, which may be, and at least in my opinion, easier to adopt.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just like thinking that there's going to be like some kind of language between all three and artificial intelligence as well. It's like that's like where we haven't added that to my platform yet, but at some point we will. But I wanted to ask you like really quickly, has anybody explored or learned about holograms and how like the development of holographic technology to be used in medicine? Have you seen that or read about it, experienced it?
I wouldn't mind creating one for myself. Just saying. It was something my colleagues might think differently to have a hologram gate around.
Well, it was brought up at Shift Medical, which was a conference that I was at, in which we were all avatars. It was super cool. The entire conference was all in VR. And that actually came up. It's like we might potentially see holograms as, your doctor. You're actually just going back to what Amkar is saying is how do we get this into the homes? How do we make this sufficient? It's like, well, that's something that we're exploring. And I know that's very PsyD, but we are developing those technologies to create that. But then is it going to be, is it going to be clinically effective? Is it going to be in compliance, right?
I think it's tough when you think of pediatrics in that space, just because of the different, children's reasonings becomes more complex, and they're able to incorporate what they're taught, what they observe, and for them to try to make sense of that environment. I'm not sure a hologram is something I'd want to put in front of kids at this point to say this is your doctor or your nurse or your provider. I think that would be tough for the younger kids.
You're like,
yeah.
I mean, I think it's cool. Don't get me wrong. I think most technology is cool, but I think overall, I think that would be a tough thing in the healthcare environment, just for that reason alone, in pediatrics, just for that reason alone.
Yeah.
Well, it reminds me of like a Star Wars episode, right? Where CP3O rolls up and opens its little stomach and then it projects out an image and there's a hologram of Princess Leia, right? So it's this idea that you can holographically transport a person into 3D in front of you with some projector and maybe a phone, right? That's getting back to
that's what it's being done with is phone.
Yeah, how phone can project that image.
Yeah.
So.
And these new lenses that are on our new smartphones are that's, I was talking about our HRV readings. It's like now we have lenses on our phone that can actually pick up that data, which is super cool.
Yeah.
And again,
but I think it's more novelty right now. And again, there's not going to be a science base for that for like a really long time.
Yeah.
It'd be a very, anything science driven is going to, is 15 years out. So if they start doing holograms today or holographic stuff today, it's going to be 15 years before we actually have, a solid database, of science. So, and I think that's the point also about VR. VR has been around a lot longer than AR. So VR has some legs to stand on and talk about where there are good use cases. And AR is just kind of new kid on the block. And people are testing that. Something none of us have said today is that, and it's just kind of obvious, technology moves so quickly, right? So we finally adopt something and then it changes, whether it's a 6-month or 9-month window. And so trying to find the right tech that actually can stand the test of time is a challenge. I mean, I have gone through lots and lots of different VR headsets over the years I've worked at Children's LA. So it's just hard to know where and when you can settle on one, I don't know if you ever can. I mean,
Yeah.
just
I
like
was gonna say, you must have like a boneyard of VR headsets.
I
And it's
do.
tough to see them when you know
Right.
that there's somewhere,
Right.
someone somewhere could probably benefit from something like this.
Well, even
But-
Starlight, we worked with Starlight to push their headsets out, and I don't really know what the usage is right now of that elsewhere. I mean, I know what the usage is at CHLA, but it went out to, I don't know, what was it, like 60 children's hospitals on car. So, but people have a lot of mixed feelings about the Starlight headsets, plus and minus. But I don't know if they're even being used, and they might already be getting sunsetted, and they just came out like right around the beginning of COVID.
Yeah, the check boxes are definitely there from an infection control perspective,
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely.
But the headsets are actually really large for children.
They're huge.
They're huge.
Yeah, they got these
And again,
funky-
I'm not going to say that
Right.
that's not, I think the product itself and the content is actually great, and
Yeah.
everything that comes with it for child life or anyone who's using it to be able to navigate what content to use and how long to use it, and does it require head movements, etc. I think that they've done a really, really nice job at that.
Mhm.
But I think they were purchased, isn't Disney buy them? I think they're moving over to the Pico, actually.
Oh, okay, cool.
I could be wrong with all this, so don't.
Yeah, no, it's
I'm
good.
sure that someone will tell me I'm wrong if I am wrong. So that's that's the benefit
We're
of
recorded in perpetuity.
exactly. But I think the headset overall is easy to use. It's easy for kids to navigate for the most part.
Yep.
Probably not the one that you were referring to earlier with the ease of use, and I'm
No.
very confident I know who that is as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, for me, it goes back to that standardization. How do we keep up with the new technology? How do we make sure that we are filling these headsets with great content for children, and we're allowing them to navigate that differently? And Erin, you brought up AI. I mean, I think this is something that we definitely should be looking a little bit deeper in, and even voice technology as we move forward with this.
Well, the reason why I mentioned that is because I'm on the telemedicine side. Again, there's a lot of moving parts, right? So like looking at psych care, well, there's triage, and there's all of, assessment and intake, and then there's scheduling, and then there's, what criteria is needed for the clinician to know, okay, is it, this patient that's coming in to either outpatient, what are their needs? Is it going to be short term? There's all of these different moving parts, and that's where AI can be really helpful, is to come in to bypass the communications and the intake process. And other, online counseling companies are already doing that, right? You've got your bot and all this stuff, right? But we, that's like long-term in our development. But it's, I think that the entire space with telemedicine combined with XR, you're going to see a lot more of that, because as you know, we have a shortage of providers right now. Like, we have a shortage of everything in healthcare. And that's where technology is going to come in and help, not completely solve the problem, but it'll be helping support those missing parts that we're seeing right now. Like, even I demoed at UCSF a couple of weeks ago, and the lead director there told me the waiting lists are huge. They don't even have enough providers. And that's why, like, I think, virtual medicine and getting this as a service is going to help pediatric hospitals. Like, it's actually coming in to help support not just the hospital itself, but actually coming in as a service. And then long term, you'll be looking at AI as a solution on top of that.
So Erin, just to go back to what Onkar said in regards to standardization, as a startup, what are your thoughts down the road, 5 years down the road, where we've decided to standardize all our headsets? Like, would you be willing to accommodate those standardizations from a startup perspective? Because it's a tough space to be in, right? You're trying to be
Well, yeah.
safe and check all your boxes from a compliance standpoint, but now you have healthcare kind of taking the reins saying this is what we're going to be doing. I'm just curious of what that would look like from a startup.
Well, yeah, and that's going through regulatory standards like FDA approvals. And the thing is, we're software too. So any well, at least in our case, is we would constantly modify and improve the software, having upgrades. I mean, we're already doing that. Like, there's going to be improvements, and on top of that, as a startup, is to have the user feedback, both clinically and from the product user feedback, to improve the not just the software, but the usage of the headset. I think that we're going to see a lot more headsets on the market. I mean, I know Apple is putting out their new headset. I don't know if you guys have tried that yet, but it's really expensive. But it's a new hardware. And all of the VR companies, the manufacturers in China, and they're starting to make new headsets. So my thoughts, just from as a software developer and creating the actual, not the device per se, but the actual platform, is to make sure that whatever head-mounted device that you're using, there is a standardization, and that's going to be more on the software side. Not every headset is. What was the one that you mentioned? Starlight. Like, that's the really big headset, right? That I remember seeing.
Yeah, it's very low.
It's like, I think, in terms of pediatrics, is to focus on ergonomics, right? Focus on ergonomics, like the Pico Neo 3 or Pico headsets, the batteries at the back of the head, and that's better for a kid to use. And for going back to standardization, this has to be approved by regulatory bodies, and that it's tested, clinical trials, everything, to make sure that it meets patient safety.
Car, I'm curious what your thoughts are. I mean, you see so many people coming through your doors. I'm sure you have a ton of XR companies knocking, as Jeffrey and myself do. When do you suggest that they turn to a software company versus a hardware company?
I'm close to there. I mean, that's what I was trying to say earlier. I think that we are, and I realize that some of the successful companies in the space have done so on the backs of building really interesting or leveraging really interesting proprietary hardware. Having said that, I think we're now at a place where we want to manage the hardware and buy the hardware we want, and then not have to and manage that much like we do other hardware. And then that enables us to be more flexible around what the software is that we need, right? I think if the software is attached to specific hardware, it makes it very hard from an innovation perspective to pilot, test, iterate, et cetera, especially if a new headset comes along that we'd rather use and this software doesn't work with that set. So the more hardware agnostic the startup is, their technology is, the better. But at the end of the day, I think even from a business model perspective, it makes more sense for me to be able to, put a capital budget together towards a bunch of hardware, and then that hardware is there for simulation, for therapy, for distraction, whatever, and then leverage software that can plug into that. It's the way hospitals purchase things. Is they've got their long-term assets they want to use, and it feels like headsets are fitting into that category, and then software is what you can kind of iterate and update as you need to.
Yeah, I think, Jeffrey, you spoke to this just with your boneyard of virtual reality headsets, as I have my boneyard of virtual reality headsets. It would be lovely to have that software just go from headset to headset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's what we're doing. Like the TheraVR software you can download onto different headsets. But this is a pediatrics panel, so I'm really focused on like the proper hardware that you would be using with a child, and to stick with that. Like, don't ever put, again, it's like, prevent any harm to the patient, right? There has to be a proper standardized headset for pediatrics. And that's basically what TheraVR is pursuing right now, is to standardize a pediatric medical device for telepsych. Sorry, that's my little.
So, you know, an interesting conversation. I think a stakeholder group that's often missing in these conversations is the chief technology officer at a hospital, because that's typically the person responsible for purchasing hardware. And I don't know just how much they have, if you look across the hospitals in the country, how many chief technology officers have really spent their time to figure out what the right hardware headset is for VR. I don't know. They're focused on other things, right? And so I think that's where, as you know, right now when a startup approaches a typical hospital, unless they have a Kate or Dr. Gold or somebody else who's really an expert in this, who has a stockpile of various VR headsets, unless they do, they're probably relying on the startup to tell them what the right headset is, especially in pediatrics. That's changing, you know, month after month, year after year, as more and more hospitals adopt VR. But even at this point, there's still a startup influences hospital on what technology built. But I think at some point soon that'll flip, and the chief technology officers, much like they know exactly, you know, what iPads to buy and what devices to purchase and whatever else, they're gonna shift towards, okay, well, these are our standard, you know, headsets that we think are appropriate for pediatrics. I think that's a few years out, but I think we're headed there.
That makes complete sense. It can make sense just from, as you said, the purchasing space, but also from infection control and adoption from the clinicians for ease of use. You want to add anything, Jeffrey?
Well, I'm really curious, Kate, what's going on at your institution around some of these problems and solutions, because I mean, we know what's happening at CHLA around whether it's hardware adoption, software adoption through our innovation studio. And I'm just kind of wondering what's happening in the culture of Boston Children's.
Yeah, we're probably in the same space that you are in regards to adopting some of these. You have great solutions on different headsets, and it's just a challenge. And actually, you bring up a really interesting point by saying the chief technology officer should be included in this. They're included from the perspective of getting the Wi-Fi to work in all the rooms, so we can access more on a different band than we do. It's not interfering with our EMRs, etc. But boy, you really brought up a great point with that. We really should have them more involved in that. I mean, they know the space so well. Maybe not VR per se.
They do, and most of them kind of geek out about this stuff. So I think they could be great if we're trying to get this entire, you know, field advanced. If you get those chief technology officers to come to next year's this conference, and they get into it just as much as the kind of researchers and clinicians do, I think they will be those kind of evangelists within the organization. They have the budget. That's the piece, right? They have the budget, so you don't have to go find funding. Like, they have sizable budgets to buy technology, and why, you know, this is small compared to the big things they're looking at.
Right. Yeah, I don't know about you, Jeffrey, but I'm very scrappy when it comes to trying out new headsets and new software. It's, you know, we're going to be on this one. All right. So what can I do to get this? I mean, what $300 grant can I use to get this? Because no one's willing to spend that money.
Right.
And it's only $300.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think to the point about the CTO and even ITIS is that usually the route I go is I'm doing something from a research standpoint, and then through the IRB, it gets dinged by ITIS.
Yeah.
And they're like, what are you doing with that? Are you creating a hole in our firewall? Right. So to Omkar's point, it'd be really nice to have a net, right? A net sort of over the whole institution that allows for the VR, AR, and other sort of devices to be operating maybe on its own designated sort of login and password, right? Because right now we've got a guest login, we've got a staff login. Maybe there should be, like, you know, virtual tech login or something so they can keep us safe. But in every one-off iteration, they're criticizing it and saying, well, you can't allow this point to connect to our internet because it creates a hole, and that makes us vulnerable. And so you have to promise us that everything will be downloaded onto your device and you won't be accessing the internet, or the Wi-Fi, I should say. And so I think that's a really great sort of strategic move, is to include the CTOs, because I think you didn't hear what Omkar said, I don't think, but the CTOs really do geek out over this tech stuff because they're all like kind of positioned to want to be like the coolest, most like, forward thinking wired group in the country, right? They're all kind of doing that. So to get them involved at the front end is they can claim that, at their annual conferences about how cool we are and how we're doing such and such. So I really like that idea.
That's another thing. So what is that most wired award that all the hospitals fight over? Is VR a question on there? Because it should be, right? Like everyone's trying to check a box to get into the higher level of whatever.
Yeah,
I feel like it from a advocacy, I mean, not advocacy, but if you're trying to really elevate this space to make it more standard, add a question. How many headsets do you have? How many active, patients have you used VR on or mixed reality on?
Yeah.
I think that's a great way to drive adoption to make it feel more mainstream.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes. I like that.
Yeah, and I also look at it from 100% from the safety perspective. I mean, they have a pulse on what's happening. I don't. To be honest with you, I don't. So I'm using these headsets. I'm looking at the space. I have, I'm collecting data. I mean, this is what's happening. I mean, we're safe to a degree, but what else is it collecting?
Yeah, no, I like that. It's a good one.
Well, yeah, as a startup, I mean, that is our essential. That's the essential partnership. Like I'm on the clinical side, and then I have a CTO, right? And that's everything. Is making sure that one person is making sure everything's in compliance. I was just curious though, Omkar, from your standpoint, when you have these startups coming into the hospital, if they're using internet, if they're using wireless internet technologies, how do you make it encrypted? Like when you have a new company come in and you're using internet technology with those different companies or devices, how do you make sure it's compliant, secure, unhackable?
The ideal state is they're using our internal, like they're in our firewall, within our firewall, and using kind of hospital internet. Like that's the ideal state. But I think as Kate and Dr. Gold were saying, I think in a pilot phase, in a small proof of concept, in a study that may not necessarily be permanent, like getting to that level is sometimes challenging. So you use the guest, you may have to use the guest internet access, which isn't ideal and it's sometimes not compliant. So it's tricky, but no, the ideal state is where you have the hospital grant that company, your company in this case, access to having those devices use the kind of within the firewall kind of staff internet or hospital internet.
I see. Yeah, because we go through a really strict cybersecurity analysis before we go into an institution. So one thing, like TheraVR cannot be used on a public Wi-Fi access. It's because it's to be in compliance. But these are just some of the challenges, and not just with pediatrics, but with hospital systems, is like how to protect that patient data, right? Because everything can be captured. And that's one of the things I've always been wondering about with VR and XR technologies is how, is it leakable? Like when you're using it for medicine, how do you protect that data?
That's a tough question, I think. Again, we talk about VR and all of the points that it collects along the way going to the companies.
Yep.
It's what are they using it for? Who's collecting what? Why are they using it? Your head movement is a fingerprint of you, and it's specific to you. What are they using that information for down the line? Are they using it? How can we protect patients and providers when it comes to that space?
Mm-hmm.
And I think Omkar just spoke to a little bit of that. Again, having the chief technology officer on board with that allows us to have another buffer along the way. Is it best interest in mind from startups, but sometimes it's tough when you're navigating bigger institutions that go across.
And also the chief compliance officer, right? The chief compliance officer is an important person to do that as well.
I have a question for you, Omkar. What advice would you give a startup trying to break into the pediatric healthcare space?
Have your evidence, we are probably even more, we are even more aware of the importance of making sure that what we're putting on our kids is safe and it's effective than even others are. So we being pediatric organization, so have your evidence. If you don't have evidence, be truthful about it and figure out how to get that evidence. Safety, privacy, and compliance are all kind of things that are especially heightened amongst the pediatric space. And then, yeah, I mean, I think try to come in with a plan around funding, right? If you're really trying to do a pilot just to get some data and whatever else, think about how you can engage philanthropy or some sort of mechanism to have your headsets donated to the hospital, right? Thinking through all those things is helpful. When startups come in and say, hey, this is, this is who I am, this is what I have access to, you figure it all out. It's nice, but it's a lot of heavy lifting for us to have to do. And so if they've thought through the business model, the reimbursement plan, how their product is compliant. Erin was doing a lot of this just herself the last, few little bit. If everybody could do that, proactively tell us in our first meeting what we can do, it makes it a lot easier.
Excellent. I had 3 questions that we collected through an XR chat through Slack. The first one, where have you found the most successful using VR for procedural support? What systems and types of procedures? I'll throw that at Jeffrey. You could do a quick answer to that one.
All right. Well, it's been a combination of software and product. So, I mean, the Gear VR we've used, and then we've used the Oculus, and now we're looking at the Pico. So we've been using all of those, right? And we've looked at again, Bear Blast, which has been a proprietary applied VR software. So there's a lot of evidence around the use of that, and anything that's been sort of more quick and needle focused procedurally. And then now we've started expanding into other areas like the T&E, anal rectal mammometry. We've looked at cast removal. We looked at areas that are not only pain related, but are also anxiety related. So anxiety, pain, and stress related. So, but we're really moving through the emergency department, through the radiology, MRI, and CAT scans, and et cetera. I mean, we're really moving into many different areas, but we always move and lean with evidence. I mean, we're always doing research, like Omkar just alluded to. I don't like to just do things because it's interesting and fun, but we really want to gather data. Anything we do, we study, and whatever we study, we present so that the field can grow collectively, right? We're all moving forward together by the use of science and evidence-based research.
Absolutely. Another question, which the second question was very similar to the first one. Another question is, what are some best practices and or policies that you have put in place around using VR with patients? That's a big one. That can be, we could be here for another 3 hours talking about that one. I mean,
I think you have to go through adoption first, right? Before policies. Yeah. So you're really in the research domain first. And then once something's been accepted, like in our blood draw arena, they've adopted it. So there's a policy and procedure around that for phlebotomy specifically. So they have lab draw areas. And so there's a policy and a procedure that's been developed for that.
Gotcha. All right, this has been awesome. I had Omkar jumped off, which is totally fine. He was amazing. I want to thank you both. I'm going to ask you one last question before you leave. It's going to be the same question for both of you. What excites you most about the future of XR? I'll start with you, Erin.
What excites me most is, well, I don't want to sound egotistical, but I'm excited that I created something that I've proven is going to really help children. And I am excited in terms of the community of virtual medicine is the adoption and the training of clinicians to use VR and XR in general. Because I can see that we will be creating universities, continuing education courses to train clinicians. So that's what I'm excited about, is that trajectory, that future.
Thank you for sharing. And I'll throw that same question at you, Jeffrey.
I'm excited about kind of digital therapeutics, right? So whether it's XR or driven by other types of tech that's coming out that we don't even know about yet, I like the integration of it for those. I always talk about those three pillars, right? Education, simulation, and intervention. And so I feel like the future is very bright around the adoption of new technology and the development of new hardware and software. It's nice to see a lot of companies moving into the space and contributing to software. I think that's that was absent for decades, really. And so I'm very excited about the new innovation around the adoption of digital therapeutics and more people collaborating. So that to me is a very exciting new innovation.
I'm the same. My mirror is exactly the same as yours, actually. we see that. And I'm not just stealing your answer, I swear to God.
No, that's good. That's good.
Well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
for the listeners out there. You can contact us. I think everyone is available if you have any questions. And this has been fantastic. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Erin. Thanks, Kate, so much. And Omkar in absence.
Yeah. I didn't see the chat until now. There's 4 things in the chat. Oh my gosh.
That's okay.
I'm impressed.
You know what it is? We started late. So I was like, oh, we're supposed to make it to this, but okay.
I'm impressed that it went this long. Really, wow. And thank you so much for your time, Jeffrey, Omkar.
Thank you.
I was pleasantly surprised that we could do this in 2 hours, man.
That's awesome. It was a good start. It's a good start, right?
Yeah.
Endless conversation can go forever.
Well, thank you so much, Kate and Omkar and Jeff and Erin, for that expansive discussion and insightful discussion about the role of medical extended reality in pediatric care. We really appreciate all of your insights and expertise and sharing it with us here in the deep dive sessions of Virtual Medicine 22. Well, it's time for a bit of a break after that session. We're going to take a bit of a break, but we will be back soon enough on the main stage at 1:10 p.m. Pacific time for our last session of VMed 22, which is going to be called Through the Looking Glass. This is going to be an opportunity for us to sort of pull it all together and to look into the future of medical extended reality. So come on back in a few minutes after a quick break. Check out the exhibit hall if there's anything else you want to see over there. And we'll see you soon enough on the main stage for our last session. Thanks so much again for being with us for the deep dives.